Hey everyone, it's time for another episode in my Piano Questions Answered series, and today I'm going to be dealing with a couple of quite closely related questions. The first one is from Arpeggios, who says, I'm able to figure out the melody of songs, but it's hard to harmonise them with a left-hand pattern. If you could teach that, it would be really helpful. And the second, which as I say is kind of similar, is from Rach, who says, I have a question regarding fake books. On these music sheets, the melody is clearly indicated, but that's not the case with the bass in the left hand, and so I find myself playing up and down with different inversions, but without a clear pattern. Any tips? A fake book, by the way, is just a big book full of lead sheets for popular songs. A lead sheet basically just being the melody line, the lyrics and the chords of a song. So for an example, here's a lead sheet for Amazing Grace, which I'm going to be using as an example today. Now as you can see, it's just the tune, the words and the chords. So let's have a think about this. When we're trying to put together a performance of a song, whether we're playing the melody in the right or we're accompanying a singer, how do we decide what to do in the left hand? To start with, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. Number one, I'm going to assume you know the chords to the song you're working on, perhaps because like Rach, you're working from a fake book. Now if you don't know those chords, then the first thing you need to do is figure them out, either by finding them online or in a book or whatever, or by working them out for yourself. Now, how you work out the chords for a song is kind of too big a subject to cover here, but I do have another tutorial on it, and I've put a link to that tutorial in the description text right underneath this video. The second assumption I'm making is that you're playing the piano either solo or as a solo accompanist to a singer. Now here's an interesting thing, both Rach and Arpeggios used the word pattern in their questions. So I'm going to start off by looking at 3 left-hand patterns that you might find useful. Now I'm going to imagine that we're working on Amazing Grace because it's nice and short and simple, and that lead sheet that I showed you a second ago I've actually put in a PDF document that you can download. Just check out the description text again underneath this video and you'll find a link for it down there. So this first left-hand pattern is about as straightforward as you can get. I'm just going to play block chords in the left hand. Here we go. Okay, so pretty straightforward, pretty simple, works reasonably well with a gentle song like Amazing Grace. I was just sticking things together a little bit with the sustain pedal down there. Now I wasn't just playing those block chords at random, okay, I was doing a couple of important things. First of all, I was choosing inversions, chord shapes, that progressed logically from one to another and progressed efficiently, okay? So in those first few bars, when I had the F to the B flat and back again, I wasn't playing things like that. I wasn't going F root position, jump up to the B flat in root position and back down to the F. I was playing this shape for the B flat, okay? And do you see how that's a simpler move away from the F? Yeah. Now that gives me a couple of advantages. First of all, it saves too much jumping about of the sort that Rach described in the question. Yeah, because if you're jumping around playing root positions all the time, first of all, it is awkward. You're more likely to make mistakes, but also it sounds kind of choppy. Yeah. If you pick the more sort of interlocking inversions, then it's going to sound more natural and it's going to be easier for you. Yeah. So put some thought into the inversions you're playing. You can't always play them as smoothly as you would want, okay? Sometimes you're forced into a jump. So for example, towards the end I wound up on that C chord there, but I wanted to come up to the root position F here because it was the end of the song. I wanted the F in the bass there as the lowest note. So sometimes you have to do it, but by and large try to pick inversions that fit together. If you're playing block chords, you also need to keep things reasonably high up the keyboard, okay? If you go down here, all these notes close together begin to sound quite muddy and indistinct, yeah? So if you're going to play a block chord, somewhere reasonably close to the centre of the keyboard, but obviously try not to fight with your right hand too much. A couple of times I was having to swap notes between left and right because it was so far up. If you want to go further down, if you want more of a bass sound, then you need to spread your notes out more. Okay, which means that your right hand might have to fill in some of the harmony because you won't be able to get the full chord down there. So the pros of that pattern, it's simple. The cons are you have to, and you know, it can sound nice. The cons, you have to think about where you're playing on the keyboard, and you have to be kind of quite careful about the inversions that you choose, else things can sound choppy and a bit sort of disjointed. Second pattern, arpeggios. Arpeggios are just basically broken chords. See what I'm doing there? That's a chord of F, and I'm running it up the keyboard from bottom to top. You can play arpeggios down the keyboard as well, but what you'll find in your left hand is that it's much easier to run them up. So if you are playing arpeggios in the left, then just keep running up. It might seem like a big jump to get back down again, but usually it's easier than trying to run up and run down again. Okay? Now, one thing you need to watch out for is that you remember what we were saying about muddiness if you play block chords down too far down the keyboard. Same thing with arpeggios. Spread out the lower notes, but the upper notes can be tighter together. Okay? The one thing you need to watch out for is that arpeggios take up a lot of space, as you can see. So I'm starting fairly low and ending up fairly high, so I've had to move the melody up an octave to give myself more room. If I'd been playing it down here, then my left hand would have been crashing into my right. Okay, so pros of this pattern: the big advantage of arpeggio is that it gives you a very good feeling of rhythm and movement. You get some good bass notes, but also a thick harmonic sound and a nice texture, and also it looks and sounds pretty cool. Okay. The cons of this pattern, the disadvantages are that it takes quite a bit of effort. It's quite difficult to be precise on your arpeggios, especially to play them even, and it's quite hard to pull off without making small mistakes. Also, chord changes halfway through a bar, or 2/3 of the way through a bar, as I have in the penultimate bar, can make things just a little bit awkward. Again, the big disadvantage, although you can plan for this, is that the arpeggios tend to take up a lot of space, unless you limit them a little bit. Okay, we'll maybe think about how you can do that shortly. Our third pattern is stride. Now, you've probably heard me talk about stride before if you follow the channel, because it's often associated with jazz and blues. Okay, if you're playing it in 4/4 time, usually what you do is alternate a low note down here, a single note on beats 1 and 3, with a chord roughly in this part of the piano. Okay. But when we play it in 3/4 time, as we're doing here with Amazing Grace, the typical way of doing it is, so one note down there on beat 1, and then chords up here on beats 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you can either repeat the same chord on beats 2 and 3, or use different ones. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The pros of stride is, or the main advantage of stride is that, like arpeggio, it gives you a really good mix of bass sound and of harmonic richness, and it also gives you a good rhythmic movement. Okay. The cons are kind of similar to arpeggio. It can be tricky to pull off without making mistakes, although it's a bit easier than arpeggio, especially at low speeds. And you also need to give yourself a fair amount of space, not necessarily as much as if you're using arpeggio, but I came close a couple of times to having my hands fighting each other for keys there. Okay. For me, the big disadvantage of stride is that it can become boring quite easily. Dum chunk chunk, dum chunk chunk, dum chunk chunk. It can get a bit grindy, a bit kind of mechanical. The way to get around that is to use a fair amount of variety in the stride, okay? Really vary your chords, put some interesting chords in, pause it every now and then. Try to avoid that kind of plodding sound. Even so, stride is a really handy one to have up your sleeve. So there are 3 pretty handy patterns, and there are quite a few more. But let's stop and think. Why do you need to use a pattern? Okay, the number 1 tip I give you is don't get too hung up on the idea of left-hand patterns. What you should be focusing on is getting a good musical end result. And the classic mistake of people who are beginning to improvise on the piano, in fact not just beginners, lots of people, the classic mistake is worrying too much about the left hand. Yes, you need to fill in some harmony. Yes, if you don't have a rhythm section behind you, you may need to fill in some rhythm and a bass line. But usually you don't have to do quite as much as you think. You can trust your listeners to make musical sense of what you're doing without overloading them with musical information. So left-hand patterns can be great, but you need to be able to move beyond them. Think about the musical end result you're after, and if a left-hand pattern suits that, then fine. But if it doesn't, be prepared to mix and match up your patterns, include other stuff, use a bit of variety. Let me demonstrate on Amazing Grace the kind of thing I mean. Okay, going a little bit out of shot there, but all I'm doing is playing an octave. Okay. Now, did you see what I was up to there? 1 or 2 interesting things were happening. In fact, I used at some point every single, well, all 3 of the patterns that I covered. We had some block chords, we had some simple arpeggiations, there was a tiny bit of stride at one point. As I said, I was mixing and matching things around in search of a satisfying musical result. Now, something else I was doing was filling in some of the harmony in the right, playing some of the chord under the melody, and that's really useful because it kind of takes the pressure off your left hand to fill in that harmony. Okay, if you're just playing the melody, single notes in the right, then your left hand has its work cut out trying to fill in the harmony. If you put some of the harmony in the right, it both gives you a more satisfying texture usually, but it means you don't have to worry quite as much about getting all those chord notes in. I was also using a little bit of substitution to make things more interesting, chord substitution. So instead of the C7 at one point, I ended up with chords like this, you know, roughly kind of a G minor 7, you know, with an added C and a C in the bass, stuff like that, and little kind of twiddles at the end, that classic kind of gospel rundown. A little bit of fast arpeggiation of the chords as well, yeah, and a couple of added ninths, things like that, just to kind of, you know, thicken it up and do some interesting stuff. So kind of in conclusion, whether you're playing from a fake book or just looking to create a left hand to a melody that you've harmonised yourself, the main thing is to think about the music, think about the result you're after. Yeah, remember that a lot of the time you don't have to do as much in your left hand as you think you do, especially if you let the right do some of the work. So there we go, hopefully that was useful. I'm still looking for questions for this Piano Questions Answered series, so any you happen to have about this, about any kind of musical pianistic subject, just kind of ask me in the comments. That would be really cool. All of them are welcome. Don't forget also, as I always say, please check out my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you, which if you're getting started with kind of chords, improvisation, reading from lead sheets, that kind of thing, has got all the kind of basic information that you need. Check me out on Patreon as well, patreon.com/Bill Hilton, my crowdfunding site. If you can spare just $1 or $2 per tutorial I make, that helps me kind of pay for my time and free up more time to make more of these tutorials. Okay, hope you like it. Follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, all that stuff. It's all down in the comments in the description underneath this video, and I'll see you again soon. Take it easy. Bye bye.